What a crazy idea, but it worked. Somehow, somewhere, John Lord managed to gain the respect and attention of the classical world. No band had ever really captured before that essence of going at a velocity in a rock song. Yes, Black Sabbath had done it with Paranoid, we all know that, but it didn't really have an aggressive production. Deep Purple made it their own. They came out with a sound that said, "We're Deep Purple, you know what, you've never heard anything like this before." I finally managed to get John Lord to admit to this, which he readily did, funnily enough. And he said, well, yes, I was actually at the time going out with a singer in It's a Beautiful Day, and it was such a lovely sound on that particular track. I thought I'd use it. If there's one track that epitomizes how good Ian Gillan was as a vocalist, this is it. When you've got 4 musicians and a singer as good as these people were, live, they're not going to stick to the script. They were a bunch of tremendous musicians that had the ability to take a song as it was in the studio and extemporize around it live and to turn it into a glorious jam session. And they did it constantly. It was an amazing experience, and it made Deep Purple what they were, a band of musicians who wanted to show off their musicianship. Now it was time to challenge themselves again, and this was the beauty of Deep Purple Mark II. They constantly challenged themselves. The Mule was his opportunity to let loose and to show that he wasn't just a drummer who could hold things together. He really was a musician. He was a percussionist, and his performance on the Mule is astounding and outstanding. No, No, No was perfectly titled. It was The Letdown on Fireball. It really was lumpen. It didn't have any of the effects and influences which had made Purple so powerful. It's an anthem, and it's become one of the rock anthems. It's hard to think of many songs which actually stick out above Smoke on the Water. Highway Star is a rock and roll song. It goes back to the roots of the band as rock and rollers in the 1950s, growing up with Little Richard, Elvis and the like, and Jerry Lee Lewis. And that's what they put into this song. It could easily have been a song done by Jerry Lee Lewis, for instance. It's got a lot of energy, but it's got a great melody. And again, it's a song that draws you in from the start. It's got so many of the elements which made Deep Purple great. The classical influence, the slight jazz motif, the blues is there, the rock and roll is there. They brought it all together into this giant melting pot. But what makes it work is the fact that it has structure. They never let it run wild and actually can disintegrate. It was a band saying, this is us live. This is not just us performing the songs from the record. Space Truckin' Live was a monster. It was a behemoth. It was so long and so extended, it became stretched to the point of breaking. It was as if the band just went on a roll and forgot how to end it. And at times you listen to it and think, why didn't someone somewhere just say, enough, okay, let's get back into the basis of the song. The great thing about Purple was they could challenge themselves and they could do it. The negativity was that sometimes they knew they could do it, so they just let it ride without thinking about discipline. The explosive talent that made it work on 3 great albums, In Rock, Fireball, Machine Head, ripped it apart. And by the time they came to Who Do We Think We Are, the negativity had taken over. The musical hallmarks of Deep Purple is an ability to create structured music and then work around it. Ian Pace, disciplined, understated, the driving force of the band. Richie Blackmore, heavily influenced by classical music, heavily influenced by blues, and heavily influenced by a chip on his shoulder, which said, I don't get the credit I deserve. John Lord, an ability to play wonderful organ. He became the definition of the organ player within heavy rock. And Roger Glover, a bassist with the ability of a lead guitarist. And on top of that, a vocalist in Ian Gillan who was unique. The musicianship was tremendous, it was explosive. When it came together and worked, it was inspirational. The effect of the change in Deep Purple's lineup when Mark II fell apart was to introduce a different element into Purple's sound. Now you've got to remember, Purple had established themselves as a very heavy band, classically and blues oriented. And when Ian Gillan and Roger Glover quit in 1973, suddenly Deep Purple were So where did they go? What did they look for? Did they look for an Ian Gillan clone? No, because that very much would mean following in the footsteps of Ian Gillan and coming up with someone who is a mere shadow of the great man himself. You can't replace like with like and expect things to carry on, and also expect people to say, well, the new guy's better than the old guy because he's mimicking the original. Do they go for an established singer, someone who already had a reputation? Well, Blackmore had already been badly bitten in a way with Ian Gillan and ego problems. So he decided to go for an unknown, and there was a guy in Redcar, David Coverdale, sent through a demo tape, sounded great, looked dreadful, but he could be adjusted and guided in a direction that Blackmore wanted to take Deep Purple. Plunged into where do we go now? To my way of thinking, Glenn Hughes is one of the most controversial choices Deep Purple ever made personnel-wise. Why? Because he was radically different to everything that Deep Purple had done before. His background, although rock, also had a more soulful and funky edge and feel to it. This is something Ritchie Blackmore, as the leader of Deep Purple, was never comfortable with. So why on earth did Ritchie Blackmore choose someone who initially and immediately would be musically at odds with what he wanted to do, where he wanted to take the band, and where he felt most comfortable? He looked around. Glenn Hughes was the most exciting talent on the British scene at the time. He persuaded Glenn Hughes to join Deep Purple. Glenn wanted to sing as well as play bass because he was tremendous at both. But what Glenn wanted to do was always going to cause a problem with Blackmore. The Glenn Hughes choice, though, was amazing. It was brilliant because the guy brought so much ability and so much talent and so much input into the Purple role. The harmonies worked superbly well for Deep Purple and again opened up the horizons. With two singers, you could do so much more. Musically, the pair hit it off superbly. I think the best example in the initial stages was the song Burn, when you had Hughes soaring away at the top half, while Coverdale underpinned it and took it through a very tremendously blues-style strength. Glenn is incapable of being on a stage or being in a studio with another singer without trying to upstage them. Now, it works up to a point because it means that you're bringing out the best in both, but Glenn is never satisfied with bringing out the best in somebody else. He wants to trash them. And it has to be said, most of the time, with Purple and subsequently, Glenn as a singer does upstage and outshine everybody, and he did it here. But while it worked, the harmonies were quite magnificent. When Burn came out, it was Mark III's debut. Blackmore, Coverdale, Hughes, Lord, Pace, and many people wondered, could it match what had gone before? To my way of thinking, it's a classic. It's up there with Machine Head and In Rock as the best albums Deep Purple have ever made studio-wise. And you've got Lay Down, Stay Down, you've got Sail Away, which is very funky, absolutely. Might Just Take Your Life, You Fool No One. It's full of wonderful songs. It had a consistency, it had an ebullience, it had a feel, it had an energy, which perhaps Mark II had started to lose. Suddenly you've got Coverdale charging in with that very blues voice that really starts to feel you're going to have a very portentous moment here. This is a great moment in rock history. You felt it right from the start. And then Glenn Hughes soars in and goes for high notes that are almost impossible to reach, but he reaches them. Not just reaches them, he actually opens them up and says, this is easy, this is wonderful, look what I'm doing here. Mistreated is one of those moments in rock history when you hear something and you just feel the hairs in the back of your neck stand out. It's very bluesy, it's very slow, very deliberate, and it really does have a feel of classic blues. It's almost a number you could expect Muddy Waters to record or Lightning Hopkins. It's got that feel. It's very epic. It's built on a very sturdy Blackmore riff. It allows Blackmore really to show his blues roots to perfection. And this is where Coverdale absolutely shines through. He has such a wonderful blues feel, and his voice on this track is magnificent. I never got the feeling Coverdale and Hughes were particularly comfortable singing Smoke on the Water, etc., because they weren't their songs. And they did a manful job. They had a great stab at it. But the problem is they were following in the footsteps of those who had created the material. And you can never do justice in the same way that the originators do. On Stormbringer, there were moments when you'd expect a Blackmore guitar to be there, and it's a John Lord organ solo. And the reason wasn't ego. The reason wasn't even style. The reason was because Blackmore said, I can't be bothered to do a guitar solo. You go out and do an organ solo, John. So I think Blackmore's lack of interest and distance from the band really undermined the album to some extent. It's got its moments. The opening track, Stormbringer, the title song, is a very strong, very powerful, very, very interesting and intricate song as well. And also, later on, Soldier of Fortune was the last track on the album, became a Deep Purple classic, and again it was a wonderful moment for David Coverdale to show his blues roots. Deep Purple lost their leader, the man who really guided them, their inspiration in many respects. How do you replace somebody like that? Tommy Bolin, yes, he was American, but he also had that feel which Glenn Hughes understood. He could play soul, he could play a little bit of funk, he could also drive in a metallic and rock direction brilliantly. He was also young and very hungry. And to my way of thinking, In retrospect, he was a fantastic choice. If only the band could have held themselves together, who knows what would have come out. The problem with Come Taste the Band was it was very much the band trying to learn where they were going. They were pushing out the boundaries, they were pushing the envelope a little bit, trying different things, and they were only starting to learn exactly where they could go. Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale were still comparatively new. They had the new guitarist in there, Tommy Bolin. It was taking time to bed everything and everyone down. So there's an inconsistency in Come Taste the Band. It has its moments. You Keep On Moving is wonderful. It's such a haunting, moody, marvelous melody. And I think Coming Home, which opens the album, is a fine track as well. Love Child later on, Lady Double Dealer. These are good songs. But the inconsistency on the record is almost to be expected because Purple were learning to come to terms with each other. Mark IV was a completely new band. Tommy Bolin never had the chance really to perform with Deep Purple for two reasons. Firstly, Purple fans, especially in the UK, wouldn't accept him. A, he wasn't English, or British specifically. B, he wasn't Ritchie Blackmore, who was the hero, the guitar god. Second problem, he had a major drug addiction crisis. So he never really got the chance to perform in the way that he possibly would have liked to with Deep Purple. So I don't think anybody really saw how good Tommy Bolin may or may not have been live with Purple. Tommy Bolin's substance abuses were legendary, were legion. They were eventually to kill him. And it obviously affected the way he performed. There's one legendary story when Purple, with Bolin, toured in Japan, and Bolin got so messed up on heroin that he couldn't move his hand, his left hand. He had to go on stage, he could barely play. He had Ronnie Dio on vocals, who was quite magnificent. An exciting, energetic band around him. He was moving in a direction he felt comfortable with, very classically oriented, very much traditional hard rock, while Purple were going off the rails completely.